Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on HITRUST Overview. My name is Kishore Vaswani. I'm the founder of ControlCase, and I'm very happy to be here with Omkar, who leads ControlCase's HITRUST practice. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Our webinar today is expected to run anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, and we should have ample time for questions, a few questions. We will attempt to answer as many as we can, but we certainly will reach out to you with other responses for questions that we are not able to get to. A recording of this webinar, as well as a copy of these slides, will be sent to all the attendees next week. So you will certainly get a copy of these slides, as well as a recording of this webinar. Of course, you can always go to our website at www.controlcase.com to check out past webinars and their recordings, as well as future webinars and their recording. If we go through the presentation today and you have any audio or visual difficulties, please put in the chat window and we will make sure we are moderating that for any audio or visual difficulties. Any questions that you have as we're going through the presentation, please put that in the questions window. And again, we will make sure we answer that in the order we get them. As I mentioned, very happy to be here with all of you. Let Omkar, who leads our HITRUST practice, introduce himself. Omkar?
Thank you, Kishore. Hey guys, my name is Omkar Salunke. I work at ControlCase and I am the partner of all our HITRUST assessments. I lead our HITRUST practice here at ControlCase. That includes, all certifications for all our HITRUST customers and also, dealing with HITRUST on any compliance activities. Thank you, Kishore.
Great. Thank you, Omkar. Our agenda for today is a very exciting agenda on HITRUST. We're going to spend a little bit of time on ControlCase. I'll talk a little bit about HITRUST at a high level. And then Omkar will walk us through the latest updates to HITRUST, the different types of assessments. There is a new assessment this year that's been added. And so we are very excited to share that information with you. We'll talk about the domains. We certainly will talk about how long HITRUST certifications take for us. As you'll see, depending on the type of HITRUST certifications, we expect the certifications to take as less as 3 months, and it can go to as much as 8 months. And Omkar will walk us through the 3 different types of certifications and the different durations and our methodology associated with those certifications. And finally, we'll spend a few minutes on answering any questions, and anything we're not able to get back to you, we will make sure we get back in touch with you through email. A little bit on introduction to ControlCase. We at ControlCase focus on IT security certifications and related continuous compliance services. Our focus is to really make sure that IT compliance and IT certifications for our customers is done in a streamlined manner. We ensure that we work hard to reduce the time, cost, and burden from becoming certified while making sure the best security principles are followed, and the end result of a certification is that our customers come out better from a security posture after every compliance or certification engagement with us. At ControlCase, really, we, in our quest to make IT compliance easier for our customers and more accurate, have 2 basic principles that we use across our IT certification services as well as our continuous compliance services. Number 1 is a partnership approach. So we are not a checklist auditor. We partner with our customers to get them compliant, certified, but also making sure their security posture improves in the process. And that really ensures that we are a partner towards their security program and not a checklist auditor. Number 2, our ControlCase Compliance Hub does many things, such as harmonizing controls, automating evidence collection, and so forth. And so we help our customers through our ControlCase Compliance Hub to automate, make their lives simpler, and keep the process streamlined while giving full visibility to customers on where they stand in the compliance process. Today, we're going to talk about HITRUST or the HITRUST CSF, but we at ControlCase really work with our customers on one audit quite a bit, which is doing a single assessment and then certifying companies to multiple standards. So assess once, comply to many. Of course, we also do all these assessments that from in a standalone manner and more. As you think of any IT security certification, the odds are that ControlCase is a certified body to actually certify you to those standards. We obviously remain accredited to all our great partners like HITRUST to make sure that happens. Next, I'm going to talk about at a high level what exactly is HITRUST before Omkar jumps into the details. So first of all, HITRUST was founded in 2007, and it started off as a certifiable framework mainly in the healthcare industry. So back in 2007, there was really no certification for healthcare, and HITRUST provided that avenue for certification for healthcare, and it continues to be a predominant and a leading certification in the healthcare industry. However, back now that we look at it in 2023, HITRUST is industry agnostic, and no matter which industry you're in, you can use HITRUST for a certifiable framework. When we talk about HITRUST, you'll hear the word HITRUST CSF, and that really refers to the framework. The HITRUST CSF is the overall framework of controls that enable organizations to effectively evaluate compliance and security risk. That's the framework that's used for HITRUST certifications. And it's also the framework that organizations can use to customize what are the controls that are applicable to them or what need to be in the purview of the certification as they go for their HITRUST certification. So when we talk about HITRUST and HITRUST CSF, the CSF is really the framework or the methodology that supports the HITRUST certification. When we talk about the HITRUST CSF assurance program, there are really three high-level components that we should all think about when we think of HITRUST. The first component is the actual questionnaire. So the questionnaire, think of it as the controls or the controls that are applicable to you, which are used to measure risk and compliance, and really the game plan that's used for the actual assessments and the audits. Number two are the auditors, someone like ControlCase, the external assessors who use that questionnaire and assess a company against the HITRUST standard. So you have the questionnaire, which lists the standard that you as a customer need to be assessed with. That's component number one. Number two are the actual HITRUST external assessors, someone like ControlCase, who uses that to ensure we're following that framework to evaluate your certification. And then finally, the end deliverable that comes out of HITRUST is a report, which is a consistently interpreted report that you can show to your stakeholders, whether that's your board or your customers, that you are HITRUST certified. So these three components, the questionnaire, the actual auditor, such as ControlCase, and the final report are three key aspects of the HITRUST CSF assurance program. Next, I'm going to turn this over to Omkar, who will walk us through the remaining of this presentation. He'll talk a little bit about the latest updates to HITRUST. He'll talk about the ControlCase methodology, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Over to you, Omkar.
Thank you, Kishore. So now let's look at all these changes and updates that HITRUST has made into 2023. HITRUST announced their new version of the CSF. It's called version 11. So the latest active version before version 11 was version 9.6.2. Version 10 was skipped, and now here we are with version 11. So what are the changes that HITRUST has made in version 11? So first up, HITRUST has added a couple of new compliance factors, new regulatory factors within the assessment, these being the HICP, which is the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices regulation, and the NIST 853 Revision 5. Along with that, HITRUST has also refreshed mappings to various other authoritative sources, maybe GDPR, HIPAA, CMMC. They have refreshed mappings to HITRUST controls across these authoritative sources. The next change is to do with the requirement statement that HITRUST shows you when you create the assessment. These are requirement statements, which in other language can also be called as security controls. So earlier, until version 9.6.2, a requirement statement would just be a high-level requirement of the CSF. And within the illustrative procedures of the requirement would be these evaluative elements that need to be tested to achieve compliance with that security control with that requirement. HITRUST has moved those evaluative elements within the requirement. So just as an example, there would be a security control which would say antivirus must be present on all endpoint systems. Now that's a requirement statement, and the illustrative procedure would have evaluative elements antivirus should be managed centrally, there should be periodic scans happening, and signatures must be updated whenever available. Now, HITRUST has moved these 3 points within the requirement statement, so it's very much clear on what the requirement is and what needs to be tested. Along with that, HITRUST has also updated the illustrative procedure content. What this means is HITRUST has a set of prescriptive examples of how someone can test a control, may it be the external assessor or may it be the assessed entity. So in the same example of antivirus, HITRUST would say, collect a sample of servers and other endpoints to ensure antivirus is installed on them. So this is a prescriptive illustrative procedure, and they've updated this to be more direct with the requirement statement and to give more examples. The last thing that they've done is HITRUST has a versioning policy, a CSF versioning policy. So version 11 includes assorted errata updates consistent with their CSF versioning policy. This includes refreshes to the baseline unique ID, that's the requirement number, if you will, based on the changes to the requirement statement level, so the implementation level of the requirement statement, and the control reference of the HITRUST CSF. The next big change that Kishore mentioned, HITRUST has added a new certification to their portfolio. This is called the HITRUST Essentials E1 assessment. E stands for Essentials and 1 for the 1 year. The highlights of this certification are it's a basic cybersecurity hygiene certification. So for someone who's looking to get quick assurance on basic cybersecurity principles, this certification is introduced now. It has merely 44 requirement statements. And you will see when we talk in the next slide about the other HITRUST assessments where this stands and why this is quicker. All right, so it's just 44 requirement statements. It's an annual certification, meaning once you're certified, the certification is valid for a year. And it's a very quick assurance for someone. There are various examples where this can be plotted on. So may it be a vendor risk assessment, or may it be someone trying to do a quick certification before they can do the other HITRUST certification. This is a perfect certification for that. Having said that, now with the introduction of the new assessment, let's look at the complete HITRUST portfolio when it comes to certifications. So the first table that we see here is different types of HITRUST assessments. The first one, of course, being the E1 that we just looked at. It has 44 requirement statements. The focus of this certification is basic cybersecurity hygiene and some critical cybersecurity threats. Right? It's not a very detailed security control certification. It looks at only 45 requirement statements. HITRUST has 5 maturity levels within the CSF when it comes to testing, 5 being policy, procedure, implemented, measured, and managed. When we get to the R2 assessment, I'll talk about everything else. But the E1 assessment only looks at implemented evidence, right? So only looking at the actual implementation done in the customer's environment. The next assessment is the I1 assessment. This was introduced in early 2022. This is a very popular assessment these days. You can see version 11 has 182 requirement statements. This adds on to the E1 assessment and brings in all leading cybersecurity practices within the control set. It also maps to other cybersecurity threats. Again, this assessment is annual, certified for 1 year, and it only focuses on the implemented maturity level. Next up is the HITRUST risk-based R2 assessment. So before I1 assessment, there was only one HITRUST assessment, right? With the introduction of I1, they renamed that assessment to a R2 assessment. And this is the gold standard of an information security framework certification, right? This is valid for 2 years once certified, with an interim assessment having to be done at the end of 1 year. This adds to the I1 assessment in terms of your security posture. So an I1 assessment has static 182 controls that are applicable to all sorts of organizations. The R2 assessment allows you to tailor the assessment further according to the risk posture of your organization. So are you within just one state of United States, or are you an international entity? Are you, dealing with just little PHI data, or is there a lot of PHI data in your scope? Based on all these, the assessment is created. On an average, the requirement controls are about 375, but that allows you to sort of, customize the assessment to add compliance factors. So for example, if you have to comply with HIPAA security rule, privacy rule, and breach notification, HITRUST allows you to bring that into the scope of your assessment. Similarly, they have other authoritative sources, maybe GDPR, PCI, CMMC, some data protection acts from across the United States. All of them are included. When it comes to maturity levels of testing, HITRUST believes that this is the gold standard of assessments, and it requires you to comply for any requirement statement across 3 levels: policy, procedure, and implemented. What that means is any requirement statement or any security control must have a mature policy in place by the organization. The organization must have a procedure on how to achieve the requirement, a step-by-step procedure, or an SOP, if you will, and the evidence that it is actually implemented. There are 2 more maturity levels that are optional. They are measured and managed, and they relate to how that security control is being measured, how thresholds are being managed, and how, if at all there is any action to be taken based on this measurement, how is that managed, right? Now, these are the 3 different types of HITRUST assessments. Now, let's look at the subtypes. Each of this assessment can be a readiness assessment or can be a validated assessment. Now, what's the difference here? And that's what we're looking at in the second table. So a readiness assessment typically is not a certification. It's just a self-assessment that organizations can do to identify gaps in their environment. They do not need an external assessor for this, but can absolutely acquire services of an external assessor organization like ControlCase to bring in that subject matter expertise. This assessment is not QA'd by HITRUST. HITRUST doesn't look into if the assessment was done correctly, but HITRUST does allow or give you an option to generate a report of the work done by you to be shared. Also, this report can be shared via HITRUST RDS, that is the results distribution system. The validated assessment is the assessment that basically allows you to submit the assessment to HITRUST for certification, right? So yes, a validated assessment is something that can result in a certification. It absolutely requires an external assessor, a HITRUST certified external assessor like ControlCase, to come in and perform the audit. ControlCase can not only perform the audit, but can get these entities ready for the audit even before the audit can begin. This is then reviewed by HITRUST through their QA check, and once certified, there is a report that's delivered to the customer and again can be shared via HITRUST RDS. Next, we want to talk about how these requirement statements flow through all of these different certifications. So if you look at this diagram and focus on the middle of the pack, that's the I1 assessment, think of this as the core assessment, right? There are 182 controls that are core to any HITRUST certification that you do, maybe an I1 and R2, right? And this is your leading cybersecurity principles assessment. From there, an organization can choose to do an R2 assessment, which not only incorporates this 182 controls, but also based on your security and risk posture, allow you to add more requirements. Also, based on your compliance needs of other regulatory factors, you can add those in as well. And then if you look at the E1 certification, this is again a subset of the I1 assessment. So typically, the requirement set here is transferable. What that means is, if you do an I1 assessment today and you're preparing for an R2 assessment, you are able to use the same scores of a certified I1 assessment on those 182 controls in your R2 assessment. So it basically saves you a lot of time, and you can inherit within the E1 assessment as well from I1 or R2, right? So it builds up on each of the assessment. Now, the timelines that you see here, approximately 8 months for R2, I1 is 5 months, and E1 is 3 months. This is, based on our expertise and the work we've done for the past 9 years with the HITRUST CSF. We feel that an average organization can be able to achieve certifications from end to end, from getting ready to getting their audit done within these timelines. And we'll talk about this more in detail next. So now let's look at HITRUST domains. What are these HITRUST domains? So these are industry standard domains, a group of domains which entail all of these requirement statements or security control. So once an assessment is created, no matter it being an E1 assessment, I1 assessment, or an R2 assessment, these requirement statements are divided or categorized in these HITRUST domains. So these range from a high-level information protection program to, training and awareness, physical security, endpoint protection, password management, access control, and the entire gamut, right? So this way you're able to sort of categorize the requirements, and for certification purposes, these domains are then looked at and seen if they meet the security threshold, right? Now, we always get a question, are all these domains applicable? So when you create an assessment, all these domains will be present, but depending on the organization, it may vary. For example, portable media security, there will be controls applicable for portable media security, but if your organization does not have portable media within the scope, right? They don't use portable media to store or transfer covered information or sensitive information, most of the requirement statements within this domain will be not applicable. Having said that, all of these will be in the scope of the assessment, but the requirement statement is where applicability comes into picture. Moving forward, now that we've looked at the HITRUST assessments, we want to talk a little about how ControlCase can help you and how ControlCase performs these HITRUST assessments. As I said earlier, we've been performing HITRUST assessments since 2014, and we've certified over 100 customers. We've created a 6-phase approach that allows you to get certified right from the beginning. So let's look at this now. The first phase is where things start with you as an assessed entity or the organization trying to get HITRUST certified, purchasing the HITRUST MyCSF subscription. The MyCSF tool is a tool that allows you to look at all those controls and submit the assessment to HITRUST. So you purchase the subscription. This is when ControlCase comes into picture. Even if you have doubts on which subscription to purchase, they have 3 levels of subscription. ControlCase can absolutely consult with you on which would be the right subscription for you based on your requirement. Once you've had the subscription, ControlCase will help you to finalize the scope. So HITRUST is slightly different than a standard PCI DSS or ISO audit, where the scope of the assessment can be determined by your management, right? It is not a standard-driven scope. It is more of a management-driven scope where the organization can determine the scope. ControlCase, with our expertise, can absolutely guide you to determine this scope and to ensure that everything is taken into consideration that needs to be certified. Once the scope is finalized, we help you build the assessment within the MyCSF tool. At this point, ControlCase will assign a consultant who will work with you throughout your HITRUST journey. Now, this consultant will not only explain the requirements to you, but will also collect all the evidence, also help you with the scoring that you have to do for these requirement statements on your behalf, and ensure that you are ready for the audit, right? This consultant is, of course, a subject matter expert with the HITRUST CSF and will always follow HITRUST guidelines. So when you do go into the audit phase, you're covered. Phase 3 is typically once you're ready for the audit, we request the customers to purchase the validated assessment report credit from HITRUST. This is a separate purchase than the CSF subscription, but this credit allows you to get the certification, right? Submit the assessment to HITRUST to get the certification. Once you have that in place, ControlCase will help you book a reservation date with HITRUST for them to do their QA. In phase 4, this is where the audit happens. This is where all the work that you and your readiness consultant have done will be validated by the HITRUST assessor. This is a certified personnel who's been doing HITRUST assessments and is expert in them. He will ensure that all the final evidences are in place, all the scoring is done according to HITRUST guidelines, right test results to ensure that the evidence is explained correctly to HITRUST. Along with that, documentation of CAPS is also done in phase 4. Now, what is CAPS? Now, there are certain requirement statements where you may not have complete implementation as per HITRUST requirements, and that's absolutely fine. As long as your domain score is above the certification threshold, no matter what certification it is, you're going to get your certification, right? But there will be some requirement statements that will need CAPS. CAPS stands for Corrective Action Plans. The consultant who's worked with you right to the start can help you document all these corrective action plans, and the auditor will validate these corrective action plans to ensure it is all with HITRUST guidelines, right? In phase 5, HITRUST has mandated all external assessors to perform a quality assurance check and an engagement executive review. ControlCase performs those. And then the next thing ControlCase does, and this is what our customers love us for, is we don't require the assessed entity or the organization to transfer the evidences to MyCSF. We do it on your behalf. We do all the actions you need to perform in the MyCSF portal. We link the documents to the right requirements. We link the evidences. We do the right scoring. And once all of it that is done, we submit the assessment to HITRUST. Once the submission is done, HITRUST will then do their QA check. During this QA check, they may have a few questions, doubts, concerns. They will reach out to ControlCase in this case and not the customer. They will always reach out to the external assessor. We will ensure that we represent you and we answer all these questions correctly to HITRUST satisfaction. And once that's done, HITRUST will deliver a certified or a validated report. So now that we've looked at the methodology, we wanted to focus some time on the timelines that we mentioned and how the timeline is divided between these 6 phases. So first, let's look at the R2 validated assessment. Like we said, it takes about 7 to 8 months to complete this assessment. So phase 1 is where, you will buy the subscription, or the assessed entity will purchase the subscription, and ControlCase will help with the scoping and building of the assessment. Phase 2 is readiness. And typically look at phase 4 as an audit that is only performed after you're ready. So 4 months is an approximate timeline, but if you take more time to get ready, that's absolutely fine. ControlCase will not start the audit until you're ready. Once you're ready in phase 4, we'll perform the audit. Phase 5 is typically to do all our internal QA stuff, and then we submit to HITRUST. Another reason why our customers love us is phase 4. So if you see, phase 4 is typically just ControlCase doing the audit. This is when we don't typically we don't require to involve our customers so much, because in phase 2 we have already created a subject matter expert for your environment within ControlCase, right? So the auditor is typically talking to the readiness consultant. These are 2 separate divisions, but these 2 entities talk to each other and complete the audit wherever questions are. Right. So this is where our customers love us, where we reduce their audit fatigue. Again, once the assessment is submitted to HITRUST, month 8 onwards, it's HITRUST quality assurance, and then you get your certification. Now, I1, you will see, because the control set has changed. So R2 typically has about an average of 375 controls with minimum of 3 maturity levels. And I1 assessment is implemented only and for 182 controls only, right? So this audit typically takes an end-to-end of about 5 months, 3 months for readiness and 2 months of audit period. The maximum amount of time HITRUST provides for any sort of audit, may it be an R2 or an I1 audit or an E1 audit, is 3 months. But ControlCase is confident that we perform these audits, the I1 audits, within 2 months. Everything else stays the same. There's no change. And finally, for the E1 assessment, this is a particularly new assessment. So this E1 assessment, we think 44 requirement statements should typically be, you should be ready in about 2 months, and the audit can be done within a month. Now, depending on, your level of security that already prevails in your organization, this assessment can also be done within 2 months, where 1 month you get ready and 1 month audit. It all depends on, where you stand today. Having said that, that is all we wanted to cover with you today. I'm going to hand it back to Kishore to see if there are any questions that we can answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Omkar. That was very informative. It looks like there's a new type of assessment. Customers can choose, multiple types of assessments, which could range from 3 to 8 months. And that gives a lot of flexibility. So there's a bunch of questions here. I'm going to go through a couple. I think the first one is around, we talked about multiple types of certifications, their timelines, and so forth. For me as a customer, what are the types of things which will help me determine what certification or assessment is best for me?
That's a great question. And, with this portfolio now with 3 assessments, these questions are always going to come up for someone who wants to do an HITRUST assessment. So there are a few pointers that we always discuss with our customers or prospective customers. And, I'll start with the most important one. It's your stakeholders' requirements. Now, typically, the stakeholders for a HITRUST assessment, when someone wants to do an HITRUST assessment, is the organization's business partner or customer who's requiring the organization to do an HITRUST assessment, right? Now, if the stakeholder is very clear that they only need a HITRUST certification, then it's well and good. There are multiple types of HITRUST certifications. But if the customer is very, specific about their requirements, saying, hey, you know what, we want you to do an HITRUST assessment with GDPR added into your assessment, then of course you can only do the risk-based R2 assessment, and that makes it very clear. The next point is, of course, cost. You've seen that customers can be engaged from about 3 months to 8 months, depending on the certification. So this is something the customers can take into account when determining their feasibility. Cost feasibility is one aspect. Then the next aspect I would talk about is deadlines, right? I mean, if someone wants a HITRUST certification to be done in 3 months, an R2 assessment or an I1 assessment may not be the right way to go, or 5 months. It always has to be an I1 assessment. So I would say that criteria is another criteria that they can consider when doing the HITRUST assessment. And that basically, resolves the question of which assessment I go for. Another quick point actually there would be the type of entity you are. Now, if you are an entity that collects PHI data or discloses PHI data to individuals, you really want to focus on the privacy aspect as well. And then the R2 assessment will allow you to do that, right? The R2 assessment will let you get into more of those controls. But if you're just a business associate, just processing the data, then you are better off doing an I1 assessment and not having to, modify your policy and procedure documents to align with HITRUST requirements. So it's a matter of, where do you fall in this gamut?
All right, great. This is all the time we had for questions. The last question you asked and a few other questions, I'll kind of summarize as we end, and then certainly we'll get in touch with other folks. But if I had to summarize some of the questions that have come up and the presentation, at HITRUST, when you're doing a HITRUST certification, you have 3 types of assessments. They can range from as less as 3 months to as much as 8 months. That's point number 1. Number 2, the thing that Omkar just said, how do I know which one I need? Well, it depends on number 1, why are you doing it? What's the level of assurance needed? If you have cost constraints. And then number 3, deadlines, right? So why are you doing it? What's the type of your entity? What's the cost? And what's the deadline? And then number 3, a bunch of questions here are about ControlCase. And really the key to remember is that because of our partnership approach, we help you navigate through HITRUST. We assign a dedicated consultant to work with you to identify gaps before the audit side of our house comes in and goes through the audit process. So both readiness, consulting, and from our readiness side of the house, and then audit from an independent arm to do the audit are part of our ControlCase process. Thank you, everybody, for all your questions. Omkar, thank you for such an informative session. Any other questions, we'll be back in touch with everybody. Thank you, Omkar, and thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you, Kishore. Thank you, everyone.